JC.
As you may know, groups forming like the Counter-Extremism Project who are trying to expose the secret funding sources for ISIL. What is the administration's position on private efforts of this nature?
JC, we welcome the efforts of non-governmental organizations and other outside observers. I know that the group that was announced over the weekend, or maybe this morning, is a group that has some bipartisan membership. And we're certainly gratified that here in the U.S. that we can work across party lines to try to confront the threat that's posed to counter violent extremism.
All right, folks, that was from the White House press briefing, making news. And here to talk about all of it is former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, CEO of Tigris Financial, and CEO of United Against Nuclear Iran, Ambassador Mark Wallace. Hello, Ambassador. Mr. Ambassador, great to see you.
Thank you for having me.
Now, what they were talking about at that press conference was the Counter-Extremism Project, which you're heading up, which is an effort to, among other things, expose the funding that ISIS is receiving, but it's more than that, too.
That's right. If you look at it, extremism has been around for a long time. What extremists have been able to do better is they've been able to harness sophisticated financial techniques, both lawful and unlawful, from modern robbery to sophisticated financial dealings, and have promoted an ideology using mass communication, social media, and there hasn't really been a counterpoint to that. And as a result of that, the extremism bubble has percolated up and really burst onto the scene with what we've seen with ISIS. But it's something that we all have to push back on. We all have to compete, use the hard, soft power tools. Look, I'm a Republican. We are bipartisan. I fully support all options on the table. But hard, soft power is also an important thing, and this is something that should unite all the tools in the tool shed to deal with this incredibly important foreign policy concern.
Why is it that it takes a group like yours to, I mean, the way the reporter phrased it, to try to find out who's funding ISIS? I mean, doesn't our government know in reality? Maybe they're not saying. We have speculation, Qatar, others, but why isn't it out there definitely who and to what tune is funding ISIS?
You know, the history of this stuff, even in the case of Iran, there were generally three buckets. The governments around the world did a good job trying to sanction Iran, and I think it was probably one of the best sanctioned efforts in history. Journalists like yourself constantly revealed different stories, different supporters of Iran and the business side. And then there was a private NGO effort, I think mostly led by United Against Nuclear Iran. Each one of those buckets was essential, in my opinion, to putting economic pressure on Iran. I think we have to replicate that in a slightly different context, in a transnational actor like ISIS and other extremist groups. But I think all of the above is the answer. And I think, you know, we're not trying to replace government. We're still an NGO or an American, international, not-for-profit. We're not going to replace government.
But, you know, and not to interrupt, but a group like Judicial Watch will get documents that the Congress can't come up with, and it always amazes me.
I think the lesson is that sometimes governments can't, won't, or are unable to act, where private organizations can act more efficiently, better, and not have sometimes the bureaucracy of it. And I think that will be our relative advantage.
Are you afraid that we are going to lose focus on the danger of Iran? I mean, some of us understand the danger of Iran. You do. You're a great fellow ambassador to the UN. Former Ambassador John Bolton does. Others do. But this administration has courted Iran apparently from the beginning, even before they admitted that they were talking to them. They were talking to them. Then the nuclear talks, the extension, the taking back of some sanctions, praising Iran, and now talking about working with Iran in one form or another in the fight against ISIS. Do you fear that under this administration, a pass, some kind of blind eye will be turned to the nuclear program of Iran in order to work with them on ISIS, et cetera?
Look, I clearly think Iran is a special case. Let's not forget, Iran is the #1 state sponsor of terrorism in the world right now. They're very capable but evil intelligence chief Qasem Soleimani was in Baghdad coordinating the sectarian violence that occurred there. So much of the mischief that is percolated up in that region comes from Iran. So I think that Iran is not a constructive actor. We shouldn't expect that Iran is going to be a collaborative actor. And if anything, I think that they are the chief mischief maker in the region, and much worse.
Yeah, and I know you're bipartisan, and you have to be bipartisan. But again, are you afraid that this administration, especially with the wild card of ISIS and the Iranian, that we're on the same side, sort of? Is that going to make it more difficult to make sure they don't get their nuclear weapons?
I think the administration needs to make sure it gets its position clear. Well, you've heard both things. It's, in fairness to the administration, at times you've heard them talk that they want to be collaborative with Iran, and other times they pushed back aggressively on it and said, no, we can't deal with Iran. I think it should be clear. The administration should make clear its position, and I fully support not engaging in Iran. I think they have some cleaning up to do there.
I want to talk about the philosophy that's behind these terrorist groups, which I don't know if there's been enough recognition, again, from our administration, who says we're not at war, who Obama says Islamic State, ISIS, is not Islamic, and his argument is no religion would condone the killing of innocents. Well then, by his definition, Al-Qaeda is not Islamic, Islamic Jihad's not Islamic, Hamas, Hezbollah, none of them are Islamic. And if we don't openly recognize the problem, and if we're not willing to openly speak about it as a nation from our administration, our State Department spokesman, when asked why don't they say war, it was asked, is it a war on terror? And she said, I don't use that terminology. Well, I mean, they tiptoe around this. Can we defeat it if we're not, as a nation, willing to recognize what it is?
I mean, we're clearly at war. This is absolutely a war, and I think we're too defensive on that. Why should we be shy away? Look, there's extremism around the world. There's far-right extremism in Europe, and a variety of other different extremism.
Not to the extent,
nothing like,
right.
yeah, I mean, you beat me to the punch.
No, I'm sorry.
Nothing like this. It's a threat to United States national security, global peace and security, and I don't think we should be defensive about it. I spend a lot of time in the region with our Arab and Muslim partners, and they are more indignant than even you and I are about this. And they are adamant. They're saying, these are groups that are taking our religion and using it against us. And they are just as offended as we are. I don't think we should be defensive about that at all. We want to be thoughtful, we want to be inclusive, but at the same time call it what it is.
Is the UN a place to get things done? Having served there for a couple of years as our ambassador, of course the meetings now going on today and tomorrow, the president's there tomorrow on ISIS, also on climate change. Which to me is ridiculous. But can anything of meaning come out of the UN with regard to the fight against Islamic terror and ISIS?
Yeah. Look, I've obviously been hopefully a thoughtful critic of the United Nations in the past, and certainly there is enormous waste, bureaucracy at the UN, and sometimes the UN goes off in directions that make no sense. There are instances, particularly out of the Security Council, whether it's peacekeeping or binding Security Council resolutions, that can have some real positive effect. And I saw some news reports that there's an attempt to have a binding Security Council resolution or forcing countries to preclude their citizens from traveling to Syria and back, confiscating their passports, or standardizing law in that area across countries that might not be compliant. I think that would be a positive step. But certainly I think it's an all items on the menu approach, and I think the UN can only be a part of that. But I think that's a positive step.
Mr. Ambassador, great to see you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
All right, folks. That's Ambassador Mark Wallace, former U.S. Ambassador to the UN, CEO of Tigris Financial, and CEO of United Against Nuclear Iran, and the new group Counter-Extremism Project. All right, folks. We are going to come back with Gimme 5. But first, on August 6, 1945, the U.S. became the first and the only nation to use atomic weaponry when it dropped an atomic bomb on the city of Hiroshima, leveling the city. And although our president has wanted to apologize for it, Japan didn't want to hear that apology, interestingly enough. And it also marked the end, of course, of World War II. So let's take a look back now at that fateful day with this hour's American Moment on Newsmax Television. Don't go away.
Four years, 8 months, and 1 day after the Japanese surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, marking America's entrance into World War II, a B-29 bomber nicknamed the Enola Gay dropped the world's first atomic weapon. The date was August 6, 1945. In a split second, the world had entered the nuclear age. Captain Paul Tibbets Jr., in command of the Enola Gay, gave a first-hand account of the events for reporters back home.
Well, as the bomb left the airplane, we took over manual control, made an extremely steep turn to try and put as much distance between ourselves and the explosion as possible.
With the Japanese refusing to surrender, and Allied intelligence determining that a land invasion of their homeland could result in 1 million Allied casualties, while killing many more Japanese, President Truman ordered the first atomic bomb be dropped on Hiroshima. Dubbed Little Boy, the device exploded 1,900 feet above the awakening Japanese city of Hiroshima, instantly reducing 68,000 of the city's buildings to rubble and annihilating some 80,000 plus people. Despite the devastation, the Empire of Japan again refused to surrender. Consequently, 3 days later, on the 9th, a second atomic weapon was dropped on the city of Nagasaki, with the same devastating results. Still, the Japanese refused to surrender. So a third atomic bomb was being prepared to be dropped on Tokyo itself. On the 15th of August, 1945, the Emperor of Japan had announced the unconditional surrender of his nation. The greatest war known to man was finally over. For Newsmax TV, I'm Bill Curtis, and this is an American Moment.